They said this generation was lazy, too soft, too distracted by screens to ever make a difference. And yet, in one of the most dramatic uprisings in South Asia, it was Gen Z, the very group so often dismissed, that forced the Prime Minister of Nepal to resign. But this was no ordinary protest. In the chaos, the Prime Minister's residence was torched. Flames spread to the Parliament building. The Finance Minister was dragged into the streets and publicly beaten. And in a shocking twist, the wife of a former Prime Minister died after. Her home was set ablaze. What could drive a country to the brink like this? Was it really just the government's decision to ban social media? Or was that simply the spark that lit a fire already waiting to explode? The truth is far more complicated. On September 8, 2025, the capital city of Kathmandu became the epicenter of a storm. Thousands of people flooded the streets. Most were young, students in uniforms, college kids in their early 20s. They had been called to action by a grassroots organization named Hami Nepal. Their destination was Parliament itself, marching from one of Kathmandu's most symbolic landmarks, Maitigar Mandala. For hours, the demonstration remained calm. Peaceful chants echoed through the streets as the crowds pushed forward. But the government had no intention of letting them through. Police units were deployed in force. First came water cannons, then tear gas, then rubber bullets, and then something unthinkable. The police opened fire with live rounds, not warning shots, not crowd control, live ammunition fired directly into unarmed crowds. By the end of the day, at least 19 people lay dead. More than 400 were injured. Among the dead was a 12-year-old child. News of the killings swept through the country like wildfire. The shock turned into rage, and that rage into action. The streets filled with even more people, far beyond what the police or curfew could contain. From Kathmandu to Pokhara, from Butwal to Bharatpur and Damak, the protests multiplied, spreading like an unstoppable wave. International media began reporting that all of this was about social media bans. But the truth is deeper. The ban was only one piece of the puzzle. Beneath the surface lay years of corruption, government mismanagement, crushing unemployment, and a ruling elite more concerned with protecting their own than with serving the people. Still, the social media crackdown played a key role in igniting the fury. Back in November 2023, Nepal's Ministry of Communication and Information Technology had issued an order. All social media platforms must register with the government and set up local offices. The official reasoning was noble: prevent hate speech, misinformation, fraud. But beneath that veneer was a strategy of control. 5 platforms complied, the global giants did not, and that defiance triggered a standoff that would come back to haunt the government. The Nepalese story took a dramatic turn when the government issued its ultimatum. The companies that did register included only one major name, China's TikTok. None of the other global giants bothered to comply, and when the Supreme Court of Nepal granted the government permission to ban unregistered platforms, the stage was set for a digital storm. On the 28th of August this year, the government drew a hard line in the sand. Every social media platform operating in Nepal must register by the 3rd of September or face a ban. To many, it felt like an unrealistic demand with an iron fist behind it. As the deadline came and went, the results were astonishing. 26 platforms were wiped off the country's digital map in one sweeping decision. Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, YouTube, Snapchat, Twitter, virtually every app that people use to communicate, share news, or express themselves was shut down overnight. The only survivor in this crackdown was TikTok. This immediately raised suspicion. Protesters filled the streets, accusing the government of hypocrisy. They claimed the ban had nothing to do with regulation or security, but everything to do with silencing the voice of the people. Social media banned by the government is extremely against our freedom of speech, and they want to control us just like a dictator, shouted one young protester into a journalist's microphone. And the anger wasn't without reason. In the months leading up to the ban, countless videos had gone viral, exposing government corruption, nepotism, and the extravagant lifestyles of politicians' children. Clips showing the Nepo kids of ministers partying in luxury hotels, vacationing abroad, or flaunting expensive cars and designer clothes were being shared widely. Ordinary citizens struggling with unemployment and poverty couldn't ignore the stark contrast. This wasn't just about memes or gossip. It was about survival. In 2024, Nepal's youth unemployment rate stood at 20.82%. 1 in every 5 young people was jobless, and with the country creating very few new opportunities, the youth were left with grim choices: either migrate abroad to find work or risk falling into despair at home. The desperation grew so severe that thousands of young Nepalese men signed up to fight in the Russia-Ukraine war. By February 2024, more than 15,000 Nepalese citizens had joined the Russian army. These were not mercenaries with years of combat experience. Many were farmers, students, or unemployed graduates. After only a few weeks of basic training, they were sent straight to the front lines. Tragically, many never came back alive. Yet despite the dangers, others continued to enlist, lured by the promise of steady pay. Russian contracts offered salaries and bonuses that could reach up to $4,000 a month, over 500,000 Nepalese rupees. For families drowning in debt and poverty, this was a fortune. But the sacrifices of ordinary citizens only deepened the anger when images of the elite's children began circulating online. While young men returned home in coffins from a foreign war, the sons and daughters of politicians returned from vacations abroad with Gucci bags and luxury accessories. On my TikTok, this hypocrisy was exposed again and again. Videos comparing the daily struggles of the common people to the lavish indulgences of the political class flooded the platform. Hashtags like Nepo Kids and Nepo Baby trended for weeks, with users mocking the privileged heirs of power. During the September 8th protest, one banner captured the pain of an entire generation. Politicians' children return from abroad with Gucci bags, while ordinary people's children return in coffins. That sentence struck like a knife. It summed up years of frustration, sacrifice, and betrayal. Ironically, TikTok, the only surviving platform, became the very space where these voices gained momentum. The ban backfired, fueling even greater resistance. Meanwhile, frustration wasn't only about social media or unemployment. It was about a system that had failed the people again and again. Corruption ran deep, and Nepal's political class had long been dominated by leaders well into their 70s, clinging to power and forming endless coalitions that collapsed as quickly as they were formed. In March earlier this year, another wave of protests had already shaken the streets. Protesters shouted that Nepal's Republican experiment had failed. They argued that democracy in Nepal had been hijacked by corrupt politicians, and some even suggested the unthinkable, that Nepal should return to monarchy. To understand this sentiment, we must go back in history. Until 2008, Nepal was not a republic, but a monarchy. Power rested not in the hands of elected politicians, but in a king. The last monarch was King Gyanendra, who ruled until people's movements swept the system aside. The transition wasn't sudden. It was born out of decades of conflict. The People's Movement of 2006, combined with the long-running Maoist insurgency, finally forced the monarchy to crumble. Democracy was established, and Nepal became a republic. At the time, there was hope that a new system would be fairer, more accountable, and more in touch with ordinary people. But years later, those hopes feel betrayed. Instead of progress, people see corruption, power struggles, and the same families passing political privilege from one generation to the next. That is why, when the government decided to ban social media, it wasn't just about apps. It was about silencing a people who were already tired of being ignored. It was about controlling the last outlet they had to express anger, grief, and truth. And the irony, the attempt to silence them only made their voices louder. Because in today's world, even when governments ban platforms, the message finds a way. Whether through TikTok, VPNs, or encrypted apps, the people of Nepal are proving that their struggle cannot be muted so easily. The monarchy of Nepal officially came to an end on 28th of May 2008, when the country declared itself a federal democratic republic. At the time, the mood was one of hope and ambition. Leaders stood before the nation and proclaimed, "We believe that all of us will work hard together to make the dream of a new Nepal come true." That dream, however, has been far more elusive than many imagined. 17 years have passed since that momentous declaration, and in those years, Nepal has seen extraordinary turbulence. In just under 2 decades, the government has changed, a staggering 13 times. The Prime Minister's chair has turned into a revolving door. First K.P. Sharma Oli, then Pushpa Kamal Dahal, then Sher Bahadur Doba, only for the cycle to begin again. Alliances were formed with grand promises of stability, only to fracture within months, plunging the country back into political uncertainty. uncertainty. At the heart of this chaos are Nepal's two dominant political blocs, the Nepali Congress and the Communist parties. The Communists themselves are divided into two powerful camps: the Communist Party of Nepal, Unified Marxist-Leninist (CPN-UML), and the Communist Party of Nepal Maoist Centre (CPN-MC). These groups, along with smaller factions, have spent years toppling each other through fragile coalitions, leaving governance a constant balancing act. But beyond the instability lies something far darker: corruption. The accusations against Nepal's top leaders are as staggering as they are damning. Sher Bahadur Dubba, leader of the Nepali Congress and multiple-time Prime Minister, has been accused of pocketing illegal commissions during the purchase of aircraft. His wife, Arzu Rana Deuba, Nepal's current foreign minister, has been implicated in a scandal involving fake documents that disguised Nepalese citizens as Bhutanese refugees to send them to the United States. Pushpa Kamal Dahal, also known as Prachanda and the head of CPN-MC, stands accused of embezzling billions of rupees that were meant to support former Maoist guerrillas. Instead of aiding the fighters who had risked their lives during the insurgency, these funds allegedly disappeared into his own pockets. K.P. Sharma Oli, leader of CPN-UML and the country's prime minister until recently, faces his own corruption case. He is accused of defying a Supreme Court order by converting state-owned tea estate land into commercial plots for private gain. And these three are not alone. At least 3 other prime ministers have been accused of illegally transferring government land into private hands, further eroding trust in leadership. What makes matters worse is the shield of immunity that protects these leaders. Since 2006, Nepal has followed an informal but deeply destructive practice. No investigation is to be conducted against any politician for decisions framed as policy. In practice, this means that corrupt officials can hide their crimes under the guise of policymaking, and no one can touch them. This immunity has acted like fertile soil in which corruption has grown rampant, unchecked, and normalized. Now imagine this. The people already living with unemployment, inequality, and nepotism suddenly find their only means of expression, their social media, snatched away by the government. This, inevitably, became the tipping point. The social media ban struck deeper than just silencing voices. It endangered the economy itself. Tourism, one of Nepal's lifelines, depends heavily on platforms like Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube for marketing, outreach, and bookings. Small businesses, guest houses, trekking agencies, and guides, all of them suddenly saw their connections to the world severed. The ban sent shockwaves through an already fragile industry. On a more personal level, the ban devastated families. Millions of Nepalese live abroad. By some estimates, over 7 million people are spread across foreign countries for work and study. For these families, online messaging apps like WhatsApp and Messenger are not luxuries but lifelines. They are the threads that keep scattered households connected across continents. When the ban struck, even those bonds were threatened, fueling anger in both the villages and the cities. The protests swelled. At first, people marched peacefully, carrying banners, chanting slogans, and demanding justice. But the government responded in the most authoritarian way possible. Police were deployed, crowds were beaten, and even bullets were fired at civilians. A democratic government, meant to represent the people, was suddenly behaving like a dictatorship. To defend itself, the government resorted to the familiar shield of nationalism. The Prime Minister declared that foreign agencies and outside forces were behind the unrest, and that banning unregistered platforms was necessary to protect Nepal's sovereignty. This, however, only deepened public anger. The people saw through it. They knew the ban wasn't about nationalism. It was about silencing dissent and tightening control. The pressure became unbearable. First, the Home Minister resigned on moral grounds. Then, the ban on social media apps was lifted. But by this time, the protests had already transformed into something larger, a movement against the entire corrupt political establishment. Demonstrations escalated into outright rage. The houses of the Prime Minister and the President were set on fire. Even the residence of the opposition leader was not spared. The situation grew so violent that helicopters had to be deployed to evacuate ministers and officials from their homes. The government was collapsing from within. Finally, on 9th September, around 2 p.m., Prime Minister K.P. Sharma Oli tendered his resignation. It was a dramatic fall, but it did not calm the streets. The people were no longer content with a change in faces. They wanted something deeper, systematic reforms, a new kind of leadership, a break from the endless cycle of corruption and betrayal. The army chief himself had to address the nation, pleading for peace and stability. Yet the protests showed no signs of slowing. Today, Nepal stands as a living example of what happens when the voice of the people is ignored for too long. Suppression, corruption, and negligence had been tolerated for years. But when the government tried to crush even the last outlet of free expression, the anger exploded in ways it could no longer control. The danger now lies in what comes next. Movements born out of desperation can easily be hijacked. Some groups have already begun whispering about restoring the monarchy, exploiting the chaos to roll back the clock. But going back to kings and crowns is not the answer. Nepal's future must still be built within democracy, no matter how broken the system may feel today. The solution must be reform, accountability, and genuine representation, not nostalgia for an authoritarian past. The lesson here is one the entire world should heed. Never silence your people, never ignore their struggles. A society built on frustration is like a dam holding back a raging river. It may hold for a while, but when it bursts, nothing can stop the flood. For Nepal, the question now is whether its leaders will finally listen, or whether history will repeat itself once again.